Good morning. This is Alan Wilburn, pastor of the First Baptist Church in Buckhannon, and we welcome you to our thought for today. We hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about just for a little while this morning. I'd like to talk about the past Thanksgivings that we've had, the principle that's established by these Thanksgivings, the power of revival in early America and even today, and then lastly of all, personal rights. Do you know, our Thanksgiving that we just celebrated, we've been doing this in North America from the English or European perspective for over 400 years. Matter of fact, some said this marked the 401st year of Thanksgiving in North America. What you may not know is there's a great deal of debate, not that we had a day of Thanksgiving, but where that day of Thanksgiving actually took place. The very first colony, English colony ever established in North America was Jamestown. That was the town. It was a Virginia colony, and that was in 1607. And they say that the first Thanksgiving was held by them and in maybe around 1618, 1619. Well, there's other people that say, oh no, there's a colony north of them called the Plymouth Colony, and they say that they had the very first Thanksgiving that's recorded, and it was in about 1619 also. Well, not to be outdone, the Spanish, who settled North America first, they had a city, the oldest city in North America, I think, is St. Augustine. And St. Augustine, they said that the Spanish said that they celebrated Thanksgiving over 100 years before the English even made their first settlement. Well, to me, that's really not important. But what is important is the very fact that it establishes a principle, and that is the principle of the people who came to North America were people of deep, abiding faith. I ran across a quote by John F. Kennedy that I wanted to read this morning. He was the 35th President of the United States, and he said this: over 3 centuries ago, our forefathers in Virginia and Massachusetts, he's trying to bring them together, and not let them be arguing about who brought or did the first Thanksgiving. He said that far from home in a lonely wilderness, set aside a time of Thanksgiving. On the appointed day, they gave reverent thanks for their safety, for the health of their children, for the fertility of their fields, for the love that bound them together, and for the faith that united them with their God. So I look and I see a principle that is established. And that principle is the people who came to North America and settled this vast continent, majority of those people were people of deep, abiding faith. They trusted the living God. Everywhere they settled, they had a day of thanks. We're in Georgia. And in Georgia was settled by a man called General James Edward Oglethorpe in 1732. Well, when he established the colony, the Spanish in St. Augustine claimed this land. And they brought an army from St. Augustine up, 5,000 of them, to attack and wipe out the Georgia colony because they didn't feel like the English had a right to settle here. Well, James Edward Oglethorpe only had a army of approximately 1,000 people, and many of those, believe it or not, were the Indian allies who Oglethorpe had befriended. And on the island of Fort Frederica, they had a battle. The war is called the War of Jenkins' Ear. The battle is called the Battle of Bloody Marsh. And in that battle, James Edward Oglethorpe won an overwhelming victory. The Spanish got back in their ship, sailed back to St. Augustine, and never attacked Georgia again. Many of the preachers in that day and age, they said, well, this was equivalent to Joshua winning battles over in the book of Joshua. It was a God-given victory. Well, the James Edward Oglethorpe and the people of Georgia decided that they needed to have a day of Thanksgiving, and they proclaimed a day of Thanksgiving and had a meal just like we do, and the Indian allies came and celebrated with them. Now, I said all of that to say that everywhere the English settlers went, they had a time of thanksgiving to the God that they believed in. It grieves my heart that we have people in America and all over the world called revisionists. They're historians who say, no, it's not exactly the way it's always been taught. And they're trying to rewrite and change history. They tell us that people who came to America were not coming for religious reasons. Well, I disagree with that. I know, and I'm not ignorant, I've studied history. I know that a lot of people came for a lot of different reasons, but many people did come for religious reasons. Let me just give you a few of the facts that I happen to recall and remember. Pennsylvania was settled by a man called William Penn. William Penn got a large land grant from the King of England, and William Penn was a Quaker. Well, in England and the United Kingdom, Quakers, they were persecuted. So William Penn established his colony. He established the city of Pennsylvania, and they came over here to escape religious persecution. In France, they had a group of Christians, they were French Christian Protestants, and they were called Huguenots, and they were being persecuted. France was a Catholic country. Catholicism was the state religion, and they persecuted. And many of those people came. A lot of those people settled right here in the state of Georgia. Others were scattered all over the original first 13 colonies. And then there were people called Moravians. The Moravians came, a lot of them settled in the colony of Georgia, the state of Georgia, and they came for religious freedom also. Also, a lot of Catholics, when the Church of England kicked the Catholics out and set up the Anglican Church, many of the Catholics were being persecuted. And a lot of those Catholics came and they settled in the colony and now the state of Maryland. Jewish people, Jews were being persecuted all over Europe, especially in France, in a certain period of time. And these people decided, that many of them, that they would come to America and they would settle. And all of these people came because they had deeply religious commitments and they wanted to escape persecution. They came here to settle. So we see the principle established is that many of the people who did come for deeply religious reasons. And then I see the power of revival. In early America, in the 1730s and 1740s, a revival called the Great Awakening swept America. It was led by people like George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, John and Charles Wesley, the founders of the Methodist Church, George Tennant, and many other local ministers like myself that were not extremely well known, but they began to preach and people began to have a revival. And what is amazing about that revival is the impact that it had on the young fledgling colonies. It so impacted the American leaders that when the American Revolution came along, these people wanted freedom, especially the freedom to worship. Later on, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, I believe there were 56 signers of that. And overwhelmingly, the majority of all of those men had been influenced by this powerful revival called the Great Awakening. And they were signers of the Declaration of Independence. Just a few years later, when the United States Constitution was written, a lot of the people who wrote that Constitution said, we can't support this. And the reason we can't is because there is no Bill of Rights. There's no individual rights listed in this Constitution. And the writers of the Constitution assured those people that if they would vote this government in, the first thing they would do is include a Bill of Rights. And they did. It's called the First 10 Amendments to the United States Constitution. And all of those amendments are important. They're personal rights, guarantee the personal rights that you and I have as Americans. There's 3 of those rights, though, that are critical. There's 3 personal rights that the Constitution guarantees that if we do not have those rights, all the other rights will fall by the wayside. The freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and right to bear arms. And do you know all of those three rights are under major assault today? I cannot help but think about the freedom of speech. You know, on university campuses and colleges across America, if a person comes in that has views that are different from the political correctness that's found on that college campus or university campus, a lot of times those people are not allowed to come. Quite often, people will come to the meeting and they'll literally stand up and shout down that person. Instead of being a place where debate is encouraged, where discussion is encouraged on different ideas, where they be political or social or whatever they be, they want to shut it all down. That's an attack on free speech. And I cannot help but think about this past election we've just come through, about our social media. I'm not going to mention the social media, but you use it. You know what I'm talking about. And if you put things down on your tweet or whatever, Facebook or whatever one you're using, then a lot of times there are people they'll cut it off. It doesn't have to be anything vulgar or rude or crude. It just happens to go against political correctness, and they'll take it off or shut it down or put you in what they call Facebook jail, and won't let you have a period of time that you can put anything in. Regardless of what you call it, it's shutting down free speech. And folks, I may not like what you say, and you may not like what I say, but for goodness sakes, for God's sakes, let's not say you can't say it anymore. I don't think people ought to be able to say things that incite violence and riots and these kind of things, but I do believe that people ought to have the right for free speech. If that right falls, then we're going to see some major problems with our other rights. Secondly of all, the freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is being aggressively attacked today. During this pandemic, it's very evident. I know that in New York City, the mayor of New York City did not want Jewish synagogues to open. And they defied him. They said, we are going to stay open. And there's been a tug, a struggle over that issue of whether they can or whether they can't. Out in California, where there's a governor called Governor Newsom, he has said that churches cannot meet because of the pandemic, that it will spread the pandemic, the virus, the COVID virus, and more people will become sick. But yet, at the same time, they'll let major retailers, major businesses, and people who want to get out and riot and gather and social protest, they'll let all of them. But churches who even follow the CDC guidelines are not allowed to meet. That is an attack on freedom of religion. And then lastly of all, the right to bear arms. Do you know the first thing that a dictator wants to do when he takes over? One of the first goals that they have is to disarm the people. Adolf Hitler did it. Saddam Hussein did it. Muammar Gaddafi did it. Hugo Chavez in South America, he did it. And folks, when you disarm the American populace, then those people have no way of defending themselves. And when all three of these, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, and the right to bear arms, if those things collapse, then the other freedoms will collapse also. God help us to have a day of thanksgiving every day. This is Pastor Allen saying until next week, God bless.